let's look at Psalm 137. I said we would get there. We want to look at Psalm 137, and we also want to look at the way that, what should we think about? Verse 9, blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. In lots of different ways, people have tried to explain that. So let's read it. So I'll go ahead and do that. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, sing to us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So this psalm has caused lots of consternation and confusion, and people don't like to read this, so they don't, and they don't like to think about it. But I think there's a way to understand this that isn't that difficult, and it just takes a little bit of working through it, looking at the context. And of course, the close context is that it reads like a psalm that is written after the capture of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple and the taking into exile of Judah by the Babylonians. And starts off, they're in Babylonia, and their oppressors, their tormentors, their captors say to them, sing some of those happy songs about how great your God is. Your songs about Zion and how beautiful it is, and how you love going up to Jerusalem and worship. Show the glorious greatness of your God. Sing those songs. And they say, how can we sing those songs? We're here in a foreign land. You're laughing at us and laughing at our gods. You're like rubbing salt in the wounds here. And these people, presumably, if it was written early enough in the exile period, these people had experienced the destruction that Babylon wrought against Jerusalem and Judah. And they had experienced, they had seen, their wives raped and their children killed. They had seen things like that. And it's one thing that the writer to the article that Steve sent out makes reference to. He says this, they would have seen this. And so then at the end, before they get to the end, they say, I don't want to forget Jerusalem. I don't want to forget all the things associated with Jerusalem, and I want Jerusalem to be my highest joy. Then they cry out to God, remember against the Edomites, because the day that Jerusalem fell, the Edomites actually participated in the destruction of Jerusalem. The Edomites, who are, if you remember, the Edomites come from Esau, whose second name was Edom, and so Esau, so they're kinsmen, they're brothers. And their great crime is not treating their brothers with love, but instead what they did was they egged on the Babylonians. They actually captured fleeing Jews and either killed them themselves or turned them over to the Babylonians, and then they plundered and raided all of the houses of the Jews that were driven out. And according to one of the apocryphal books, First Esdras, they set fire to the temple. And so they're not remembered very fondly. And there's been centuries now of dissension and fighting between these two groups, the Edomites and the Israelites. But this is really bad. So the Israelites are calling for God to remember that. And that's a way of saying, this is a crime that needs to be fixed. Your justice needs to come back on them. And then about Babylon, they say three things. Babylon is doomed to be destroyed. So they know that Babylon is going to fall. They know that. And they say, blessed is the one who repays you for what you have done. So pays them back for what they've done. That's the foundation of the justice system, of any justice system, is people get paid back what they have done. And blessed again shall be the one who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So they're not calling for God to let them take personal vengeance. They are not calling for their neighbor to take personal vengeance. They are saying they know Babylon is going to be doomed. Babylon is doomed, and that they are pronouncing a blessing on God's instrument of destruction, whomever that might be. And the blessing, yeah.
Concerning the Edomites, they were never really friends of the Israelites, were they?
No.
I mean, in their whole history, they weren't.
They weren't. Yeah, the whole time. The whole time they were always resistant and always. And God had commanded the Israelites during the journey to Canaan to be brotherly to the Edomites, but the Edomites were kind of like Shammai and gave them a hard time the whole time they were passing by. And so it's always just from Jacob and Esau, it just continued all the way through that. You took away my family birthright, and my life is ruined because of you, and so I'm going to get you back now. Generations of that. So the first thing I want to
go down that trail.
Yeah.
Want to go down that trail? Because I have never saw where that Jacob took anything from Esau.
Yeah.
Esau offered his birthright for some food, and Jacob said, "Okay."
Yeah. You know how memory gets twisted as time goes on. You feel you've been wronged. I think we were experiencing some of that in our culture. There's several places that use this phrase, dashing children against the stones. And I thought we'd look at those. I thought I'd written down, okay, so I have them on page 9. There's a quotation from Stein, and in the center of that quotation, there's a parentheses that says where the passages are. I think I had them somewhere else too.
They're also on page 4.
Thanks, that's the one I'm looking for, page 4. So let's look at these just quickly, kind of go through them so that we can see that this is not something that first shows up in Psalm 137. There are lots of other places where this is used. Let's look at 2 Kings 8:12. Second Kings 8:12. Don, do you have that?
2 Kings.
You can start earlier if you want.
8. Okay. We'll start at 8. Hazael, why is my Lord weeping? Asked Hazael. Because I know the evil that you will do to the Israelites. Elisha replied. You will set fires to their fortresses, kill their young men with the sword, dash their little ones to pieces, and rip open their pregnant women.
Okay, so here's a prophecy, basically, and this is way before Psalm 137. quite a long time before. Let's look at Isaiah 13:16. Isaiah is writing between 739 and 701 BC. Psalm 137, on my estimation, it was written somewhere after the fall of Jerusalem and before the destruction of Babylon. So we're talking about between 586 and 539. So we're 200 years difference here. So Isaiah 13:16 says, if I can find it, 13:16. It's talking about destruction of Babylon. Their infants will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be looted and their wives ravished. See, I will stir up against them the Medes. So he's talking about the destruction of Babylon by the Medes in this. And you see it's the destruction of Babylon by looking at verse 1 and also by looking at verse 19. So it's important actually that this is about the destruction of Babylon, as is Psalm 137. So let's look at Hosea 10:14.
Let's hang with this just for 1 second.
Yeah.
I forgot what I was going to say. Darn. Okay. The timeline here is fascinating. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. I was looking at Spurgeon's comments on verse 9, and he talked about it in terms of, I have to look at it again, but he talked about it in terms of the Babylonians basically committing suicide and killing their wives and children, knowing that that might be sparing them what might be carried out by the Medes against them.
Yeah, I saw that. And actually in Isaiah 14, verse 20, take a look at that verse. Isaiah 14, verse 20. It's also still about Babylon. He's talking about, it's a taunt against the king of Babylon, who is now pictured as being dead, and he's going down to Sheol, and says he's not going to be buried. You will not join them in burial, for you have destroyed your land and killed your people. That's fascinating in light of what Spurgeon said about the Babylonians killing their own families.
What was the rationale for the Babylonians destroying their own family?
They thought they'd be treated worse by the Medes and the Persians. Yeah.
So
Treated worse than what?
Than killing
the
themselves.
torture, the torture that they would have to endure before they, as they were being killed.
Ah, okay.
Also, you have to also remember that we're talking about closer to Oriental culture than a Western culture, and the indignity is the thing that is most feared. It is more feared than death. So
Taken prisoner.
Yeah.
Oh, one other comment then, you mentioned indignity. Another thing that Spurgeon mentioned with regards to verse 3 that I thought was interesting, with regards to making them sing these songs, and whatever Spurgeon uses the phrase, this is studied torture, to make the Jews engage in, or asking them to sing and play music and whatever. So this is studied torture. This is an affront against their dignity and their God.
Yeah, I think he's right there. So Babylonians, Babylon is the evil empire. They're not the good empire. They're the evil empire. And so here we have the language about dashing children in a prophecy of Isaiah. We also had it in the prophecy back in 2 Kings 8:12. Let's look at Hosea, 2 places there. And that would be Hosea 13:16 and I'm sorry, 10:14. Hosea 10:14. So Hosea is writing before the fall of Israel. So he is writing, 800s, 700s, around there. And again, Psalm 137 is quite some time after that. Hosea 10:14, writing about the destruction of Israel. Starting in 13, but you have planted wickedness and have reaped evil. You have eaten the fruit of deception, because you have depended on your own strength and on your mighty warriors. The roar of battle will rise against your people, so that all your fortresses will be devastated, as Shalman devastated Beth Arbel on the day of battle, when mothers were dashed to the ground with their children. So the Hosea here is saying the same thing is going to happen to you. You're going to be destroyed in like manner. So it's a prophesy against Israel, at the destruction of Israel. And then Hosea 13:16, about Samaria. The people of Samaria must bear their guilt, because they have rebelled against their God. They will fall by the sword. Their little ones will be dashed to the ground, their pregnant women ripped open. This sounds almost identical to the 2 Kings reference. It's got the little ones and the pregnant women. So this is being now applied to Samaria.
And when they say Samaria, they're talking about the northern kingdom.
Yeah, talking about the northern kingdom, because Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. So we got one more to look at, Nahum. It's just a few pages over. And Nahum 3, verse 10. And there's a description here in the fall of Thebes and Cush and Egypt and Put and Libya. And it's part of the prophecy against Assyria. This is what's going on here. And in verse 10, we can see who it is. Verse 8, are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? The river was her defense, the waters her wall. Cush and Egypt were her boundless strength. Put and Libya were among her allies. Yet she was taken captive and went into exile. Her infants were dashed to pieces at the head of every street. Lots were cast for her nobles, and her great men were put in chains. You too will become drunk, and you too will go into hiding and seek refuge from the enemy. So, and actually I said it was about Assyria, but it's actually it is Assyria, but it's directed at Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria. So the use of the language here is not, it doesn't show up the first time in Psalm 137, and so it's less shocking than it first appears, even though it is shocking language. It is somewhat lessened by the multiple use of this. And Stein, in that quote that I referred to on page 9 of your handout, he says this is an idiomatic expression, meaning that it's an expression that just means you will be conquered. So it's kind of like saying, when David says, and Goliath says to David, and David says it back, I'm going to feed your carcass to the birds, right? That doesn't mean I'm going to feed your carcass to the birds. It's not to be taken literally. It just means I'm going to kill you in battle. I'm not really care what happens to you after that. So it's an idiomatic saying. And so Stein offers that as an explanation of the harsh language in Psalm 137. And he says, well, they're not actually saying, I hope that this happens to you. They're saying you're doomed to destruction, and this is an image of destruction. I think there's even a better way to look at it than that, but I agree with Stein that it has the ring, a feel of an idiomatic saying. So, when Jesus says things in the Gospels, in fact, he uses a phrase exactly like this in Luke 19. We should probably just look at that so we get all of them. It's Luke 19:44. But Jesus uses other phrases that just mean warfare, brother against brother, nation against nation. These come up in the Old Testament too. They're idiomatic sayings. So this is the triumphal entry, and verse 37, when he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." It could be literal that in the destruction of Jerusalem, babies were dashed to the ground. That probably happened, but Jesus is using it as this is going to be fierce warfare, and it will be a complete destruction. I think it's idiomatic for that. So he's using the same phrase, and according to the Septuagint, he's actually using the same words as are in Psalm 137. So I think that's part of the explanation, but I think there's more to it. If we think about the timeline, I said it's important to know the context. And there's a context in Psalm 137, which is partially that they're in exile and they're upset about that. And they're looking forward to being delivered. And they know Babylon is doomed. One of the things in the article the only thing that I objected to, actually, in the article, did anybody notice this? There was a sentence in the article that said that the Israelites had been treated so badly and they were innocent.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
He said, I was surprised you missed that, Steve, because you saw a lot of things in there. He says, in fact, I might even have it pulled up somewhere. Let's see if I've got it.
It's a familiar refrain when saying they are innocent.
They're innocent.
When they're, with respect to some of the protesters and the looters.
Yeah, so it's the paragraph that afterward says the Bible is not silent about the rage of the oppressed. I'll just read it. One of the most startlingly violent passages in the Bible comes from the lips of the disinherited. In Psalm 137, the psalmist says, "Daughter Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks." How can wishing such an atrocity be in any sense a religious text? And here's the sentence. Here's the next couple of sentences. Psalm 137 is a psalm of the traumatized. I'm not sure that's true. It depicts the aftermath of the destruction of Jerusalem, the sack of the city, sexual assault, and brutalization of the innocent. Were they innocent?
Yeah, that's why God had them destroyed.
Yeah, that's exactly why God sent the Babylonians over there to destroy them, because they had not, for the past, 900 years, they listened to God every time he sent them a prophet. They never persecuted a prophet. Like, are you kidding?
Were there any prophets that you didn't persecute?
That's right. So I thought, wow, that really puts a spin on things. They're not innocent. They weren't innocent. I think what happens when God judges a nation. Yes, Mom.
Finish your sentence, and I have a question.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what happens is, if you think about the guilt of Judah. So this is for their entire existence. Judah's been sent prophets and never listened. That's what the sacred record says, and that's why they're being destroyed. So you have hundreds of years of sin and rebellion and attacks on God's people, attacks on God's honor, perpetrated by these people of Judah. And so what you have is 300-400 years of offense, right? And then what you get is 3 weeks of horrible war, and you go,
followed
by the 70 years because the sin's not paid for. But But we look at the horrors of the war and we go, man, that's awful, and it is. But it's just a condensed. It's all that sin of hundreds of years paid for in a shorter time than hundreds of years. So of course it would be, violent. So anyway, Mom.
So when we read the passage in Luke, and then I went back to Psalm 137, I was thinking about what Dr. Godfrey had talked about, and we've talked about how these are the words of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a real similarity here because Jesus wept over Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And this starts out by the rivers of Babylon. We sat and wept when we considered Zion.
Oh, yeah.
And then it goes on and talks about how this land is doomed.
Yeah.
And Jerusalem was doomed.
Yeah.
And that their destruction is going to be like the destruction in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And it just sounds to me like the same story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the things you pointed out are, good spot there. I think that, and I think also when people react to Psalm 137, we assume a tone of voice that you can't tell, from this. Jesus said nearly identical words, but he was weeping. So you can't tell. And I think part of our reaction is they're gleeful, but maybe they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're anticipatory.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have a question.
Yeah.
We have said that there's been reference made that they knew that Babylon would be destroyed.
Yes.
Who knew this, and how did they know it?
That is so good. What a great segue. I will pay you afterwards for that.
I was going to ask that question.
It all goes to Don. He was on the ball.
I'm never afraid to look stupid.
So look at the timeline I sent out. I hope you had a chance to look at that. If you didn't print it out, just pull it up on the screen. So we read from Isaiah 13, where it uses the language against Babylon that God will dash their children against the rock, or that their children will be dashed against the rocks by the Medes and the Persians. That's what it says in Isaiah 13. If you look at your timeline, Isaiah wrote, way before where Psalm 137 would be, which Isaiah's writing around 739 to 701. 200 years later, in Psalm 137 is written sometime between 586 and 539. So after the fall of Jerusalem and before the fall of Babylon. That seems like the reasonable place to put it. Other people have dated it in other places, but I don't find their reasons compelling. So Isaiah not only predicts the fall of Babylon, but he predicts what nation is going to do it. Right, this is what we read in Isaiah 13. He even predicts by name the person who will do it. If you go to Isaiah 44 and look at verse 28,
Mm.
44:28, the Lord says,
It's odd. Here's another example. Maybe it's completely not the same, but on mine, verse 28 starts in the middle of a thought.
yes.
In one of my translations, it says, who says of Cyrus, and then has a quote. And my other translation says, who says to Cyrus. my shepherd, and he will fulfill at all my pleasure.
Right. So it's about Cyrus, and legend recorded by Josephus, and he's recording it as history, not as lesson, says that Cyrus was sleepless one night, and he called for the, I guess the thing that you want to read when you're tired is the royal annals. He said, go get me some really boring stuff so I can fall asleep. So they came back with a book of Isaiah. And so Cyrus randomly opens up the book and starts reading, and he gets to this verse, who says of or to Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundation be laid. And then 45:1, this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you and will level the mountains, etc. Cyrus was reading this, obviously he's reading through Isaiah, he gets to this, and all of a sudden he is wide awake.
No doubt.
And he's like,
What?
He's like, what? I gotta let the Jews go home. You know.
Well, okay, hang on.
Yeah.
So at this point, he is already running what used to be what Babylon was
Yep.
running.
Yeah, in this version of the story, he's that. So where would the Jews have known that Babylon was doomed to destruction? They'd know it from Isaiah. They would know it from Isaiah 13. It's the Medes. They'd know the name of the conqueror here in Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1. They would know that he's going to conquer Babylon, set them free, tell them to go home and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. This is the thing they're looking forward to. And so blessed is the one that God raises up to do that. You know, that I think is how to really properly understand what's going on there.
Hold it. So this is like they're not speaking what they are aware of. I mean, they know what's happening here, but they don't want to put it in words.
You mean the Jews?
Yeah.
In Psalm 137.
Where the author of 137. The author of 137 is speaking kind of obliquely.
Yeah, he's not naming Cyrus or anything like that. And they also have the prophecies of Daniel. Just let me mention that. So Daniel's prophecies were probably earlier. They were in the exile period, and probably earlier than this. But he had said that there would be 4 great kingdoms, and that the second kingdom would be the Medes and Persians.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they would take over the Babylonian kingdom. So they have all the pieces of everything they need by looking at their own scripture. And here's the clincher, I think. When they say, blessed is he who dashes your children, they are just quoting Isaiah 13. They're repeating back to God what God said he would do. And they're saying, we know God said he's going to raise up a leader. And in fact, Cyrus was born about 600 BC. So they're living in a period where Cyrus is alive. I mean, they know Cyrus is alive because they went into exile in 586, and Cyrus has been alive. He dies shortly after he delivers the Jews from Babylon. So I think all of that has to be taken into consideration when we try to interpret Psalm 137. I don't think it's obviously not, dashing the children is not something that comes out of the blue. It's got a lot of history. And the fact that it was said by God in Isaiah 13 about the future destruction of Babylon 200 years before. And then Cyrus is named 150 years before he's born. And then Daniel says, Medes and Persians, just like Isaiah had said. And so the Jews are sitting in Babylon, and the thing they want is to go home. And how's that going to happen? Well, Cyrus is going to do that. Blessed be Cyrus. He's going to dash those babies. He's going to overcome Babylon. So I think that
he's going to oppress our oppressors.
He's going to oppress our oppressors, right? And so I think that is the context, really. I think that's the biblical context of what's going on there. And that kind of really changes the way that you look at Psalm 137. The other part of Psalm 137 is the Edomites. You know, the Edomites, they prayed to the Lord, take care of these people who did this terrible thing to us. And after that, or sometime in the exilic period, probably, you know, within 20 or 30 years of Psalm 137, I don't know which one would have come first, but the book of Obadiah is written as a judgment against Edom. You know, Edom was destroyed by Babylon. So after they get kicked out of, you know, Israel and dethroned from their power, they still exist in some form, and they destroy the Edomites. They do that in 533. So Obadiah is written sometime before 533 and sometime after the fall of Jerusalem, because in Obadiah it talks about the Edomites jeering and participating in the destruction of Jerusalem. So what we have in Psalm 137 is kind of a combination of the prophecy of Obadiah and the prophecies in Isaiah and Daniel. And what I see here is the Jews are longing to go back home to Jerusalem and not be under the oppressor. And,
Some of them anyway.
yeah, some of them. So.
Well, that's just embarrassing.
Which is?
To not remember that Daniel had prophesied this about Babylon.
Yeah.
It was years before.
Way years before, right. So they would have known from a prophet they had with them in Babylon, Daniel. And they would have known. Also, Jeremiah says Babylon's going to fall, but the Medes are named specifically by Daniel and by Isaiah. And for me, when I look at Psalm 137, the wording of the dashing of children coming from Isaiah 13 is decisive for my interpretation of it, because it seems to me they're just saying to God, do what you said. We look forward to this day.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's close.
Okay, so this is not necessarily the Jews expressing their anger as much as it. I mean, they're obviously they were harassed by the singing stuff, but what they're asking for here isn't a manifestation of that anger. It is just, okay, God, do what you're going to do.
Justice.
Yeah, and actually, I would go even a step further than that. I think they're not. I mean, they are saying that, and I did say that they were saying that. But I think if you read verse 9 again, the thing that they're asking for, the primary thing that they're asking for, is not the destruction of Babylon. They're asking for a blessing on the one whom God raises up as the instrument to destroy Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a cry of hatred. This is a prayer for blessing.
Yes, because Jeremiah had commanded them, the Jews, to pray for their
captors,
right?
Right.
Huh?
Yeah, he did say that. So I think as a piece of literature, just reading it, the emphasis is on the thing they're asking for is God bless them. Blessed be. Blessed be. And so I think that this is speculation, but what I think is that they read in Isaiah that God's going to raise up a guy named Cyrus, and he's going to deliver them from Babylon. And he's going to be a Medo-Persian king, and he's going to deliver them. He's going to send them back home. And then they sit down and they start praying for Cyrus. You know, God, raise him up. Bless Cyrus. Give him strength to do the job.
Yeah.
Because the one thing they want is to go back home. So.
got a
So-
question about the timeline.
Yeah,
You have it down, fall of Babylon to Cyrus the Great in 539.
correct.
But apparently this doesn't mean that Babylon was wiped out. It just means that they were displaced from Babylonia or something, because 6 years later it says that Edom falls to Babylon.
Right. So this is interesting. This is an extra bonus thing about the language of judgment that the Bible often uses. It'll say like Babylon in Revelation, it says, speaking about a different setting, but Babylon the Great fell in one day. And we hear that, we know that all the kingdoms of the earth in the book of Daniel, the 4 kingdoms are destroyed at the ascension of the Son of Man, but then it says they're allowed to continue, even though they're destroyed. And so the language of destruction in one day and Babylon will be destroyed, these nations in the Old Testament are only relevant as their history intersects with the history of God's people. So when the Babylonians are the overlords and oppressors of God's people, well, that period, the length of Babylon's domination over them is 70 years. And the length of Babylon's sin being built up until they're judged is 70 years, according to God, Jeremiah 25. And then Babylon gets judged, and they become now off the scene. They're no longer oppressing God's people, but they are not completely destroyed. But as far as Israel is concerned, their destruction was in a day. They're gone.
Their power has been destroyed.
Their power has been destroyed over me, even though they can go down the street and destroy the Edomites. So we have the same type of thing, I think, in the book of Revelation, when I think the second part of that book is talking about the destruction of Rome, which is said to be soon and near and at hand in the Revelation, but which actually took 400 or 500 years. And how do you reconcile that? Well, I think the Roman influence over God's people lasted much shorter than the Roman Empire did.
Mm.
Oh.
So I think that's what happened. So, same thing with Greece and even Rome that's talked about, in Daniel's prophecy. It says, and then Rome's going to come in and do this. But Rome existed way longer than the time it came and conquered Greece and took over the Holy Land. So it's not the career of Rome that's being talked about, but how Rome affects God's people. And so when that's broken, then it's over, regardless whether or not Rome is still around.
Oh, so same thing with, so then those passages that say, well, Babylon will be gone and wiped out or whatever, okay, I get it. Like your mom said, that is their power, their influence, their worldwide influence is diminished.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Babylon is 539. That's the last time they're harassing God's people, but God uses them to judge the Edomites. So it's the Habakkuk thing again, right? They're terrible. Why are you using them? But they get judged later. So anyway, I had thought that maybe we would look at all the passages in Daniel and read more in Isaiah, and that would have been really profitable, but I noticed we didn't actually have enough time to do that tonight, so I thought I'd get through the quick run through. What did you think of that as far as how that might bear on Psalm 137?
Helpful.
It takes the edge off.
So I think that definitely is part of the context. So,
Yeah, just Lord, just do what you say you were going to do.
yeah.
As through the words, through the prophets.
Yeah, and they had come to learn that the prophets were right. You know?
Yeah.
That was one of the results of the exile.
And while they were in exile, it's always possible that the prophets that went with them may have reminded them of that after they got into exile.
Yeah, well, Jeremiah, most of the book of Jeremiah is about the destruction, the coming destruction of Babylon, the soon coming destruction of Babylon is what Jeremiah is prophesying about. And so the people who wrote Psalm 137, they're thinking, I think, this is going to happen in my lifetime. This is right now. It's going to happen. Can't wait.
In the near future.
Yeah. So.
I think it's very helpful to think about your point that dashing the children against the rocks could be an idiomatic expression. It referring back to something that used to happen. Maybe it isn't going to literally happen this way, but the end result is the same.
Right.
And I'm trying to think, I'm like Steve, I like to find analogies. And I'm thinking, well, how often nowadays do you hear people saying, I'm going to take you to the woodshed? Well, nobody's going to do that, but everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
And it used to happen.
Well,
But-
everybody in our age group knows what.
Stephanie might be thinking about, what are you going to do in the woodshed? Are you going to make something? Or?
What is a woodshed?
What are you going to build?
Obviously, it's a shed made out of wood.
Honestly, none of the idioms make any sense if I think about it too much.
Yeah, the idioms don't make any sense literally anymore, but they do communicate something. So, yeah. Anyway, that's what I wanted to cover tonight. If anybody had something they thought that the article contributed to Psalm 137 that I didn't cover, please, it's good to offer it now. My personal assessment was that he didn't know what Psalm 137 was really talking about. But
Did we talk about Isaiah 49?
I don't think we did. That was the his counterpoint, right? That God is looking for reconciliation and forgiveness.
It could be might be an example of someone taking something and trying to change it to support their position.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if I think probably he hasn't spent a lot of time with it, and then he's reading the psalm through. He forgot the key thing. I think one of the things he said I thought was really helpful was that Psalm 137 is there to help people remember. And he wanted the people to remember state-sponsored terrorism. But actually what the Jews would remember were, wow, we went into exile because of our sin.